All right, I hope everyone on the internet can hear me. If you can't, just speak up. See this? So, really nice weather out there. I mean, like surprising because it started out so cold, but yesterday was just a spectacular day. And the fact that we have an hour extra sunlight in the evening was just great. So, welcome to Grand Rounds. We have a new food today, and we're trying to decide uh, between the Panera and the Early Bird. It seems to be a tie, 3-3, which is bizarre because we've got about 30 people in the room. But there it goes. We could, Joel, you could be the cast the deciding vote.
Did vote.
Okay, which one?
I hear the dissent. Don't understand it.
Oh, there is another donut mention here. So this is today's CME code. So our all-stars, Hiba Al-Salani, who's a member of the Great Memory Division, agreed to help see a patient on her administrative day when a patient showed up unexpectedly, which is not unusual in memory clinic. They just show up randomly. And if any of you have all-stars to nominate, send them to Tico now. He's handling the all-stars and the coffee cups. Does Tico have the cups? Doesn't have, where are they, Maureen? Okay, I don't do Hawk. That's the world's worst parking. Do not go to Hawk. On the research roundup, Brad Coles and Danny Laskowitz were part of a study in, it must be Nature. Spring Nature, is that a thing? I don't know, never. So, but even though I don't understand the journal's name, it was an important paper because they looked at why trials fail. And it's almost always because of lack of enrollment, and talked about the a new innovative way of enrolling patients in their study. So it's worth reading. Cheryl was part of, or actually wrote an editorial in Critical Care Medicine looking at intensive care unit teams and how they need to operate around the new brain death guidelines put out by the American Academy of Neurology. Some promotions to celebrate, little round of applause. Andy Liu, Naya Mantry, and Kyle Mitchell were all promoted to associate professor from assistant professor. Congrats to them all. And in line with that, the department's promotions extravaganza, and again, is Tuesday, March 19th, 5 to 7:45, Bryant Building, first floor with dinner. It was a big hit last time we did it, and all assistant and associate professors are invited. I think, Suma, you're going to be talking at that too. Yep. I meant to mention this, we're still having the Slicer Dicer course. It's Wednesday a month at 5 to 6. It's a nice way to start into research. It's a way of asking questions to the electronic medical record to come up with a nice paper. I don't know when the next one is scheduled for. I'll send out an email on that. Elijah sends out an email, so keep an eye on it from Elijah. Pizza is served. And today is National Ken Day. And I was trying to decide, is there anyone in our department named Ken? We couldn't think of anybody. Anyone in this room named Ken? No. But in 20 years or 30 years, there'll probably be a room packed with Kens. Everyone, there's going to be a surge on people named Ken. But hopefully they'll have a Ken Day in 30 years for him. St. Patrick's Day is this Sunday, and here's the other donut reference, the Dunkings. Where's Ryan? Is he here? I had to go to a stroke code because he ordered one of these things after the Super Bowl. I tried to too, but they were all out of them by the time I got them. And my daughter's in college in Chicago, and they apparently turned the river there green. What's the name of the river in Chicago? Is there a name for it? No one knows it? I don't either. It's the Chicago River? Okay. But they turn it green. So most of you, or a lot of you probably don't know who Carrie Unger is, amongst the residents or stuff, but Carrie is an administrative officer, now vice president of the health system, who's been in the department for 20 years, started out running clinics at Maureen Road and 1L, and now is the senior vice president for neuroscience, meaning neurology, neurosurgery, and psychiatry. And she's leaving after 20 years to go to Kansas. And we wish her the best. It's someone like you have a work wife or a work husband to someone you work hand in hand with. And Carrie's just been a great partner for all these years, the 10 years I've been here and the 10 years before that. We're having an event for her tonight, and I believe the hospital's having an event for her around 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon. So anyway, thanks, Carrie, for all you've done. And this is today's CME code. And today's speaker, the great Suma Shah. Suma doesn't need an introduction. Were you here when I first got here, Suma? You were, yeah. Remember the Christmas party? So 10 years, and Suma's always been interested in education. I mean, she's always been just a phenomenal doctor, and it's been like a 7 or 8 year run for her to take over the residency, but that was always the plan because she seemed like a perfect fit and person for the job, and her first year on the job has just proved that. We're just coming off match season, and Suma told me that I think for the 8th year in a row, we filled in the match. We're getting kind of the wink from the health system. We'll be able to add another position. I heard that our neurology is the second most consulted service at Duke, next to cardiology. And so it's an incredibly busy program. I was the residency director at Hopkins for a while, a long time ago. And in those days, the job just involved telling jokes and slapping people on the back and just say, you'll get through it, you'll get through it. And now it's such a complicated job. And it's the kind of job I would be a complete failure at if I had to do it, because there's so much bureaucracy involved, right, Suma? And so much feedback. I'm terrible at feedback. But in any case, we're incredibly, as you all know, incredibly fortunate to have her, and we're fortunate to have her today to give grand rounds. And the title of her talk is The Career Experience of Women in Academic Neurology. So Suma, thank you so much for agreeing to talk today. Okay.
I think I can. Thank you, Rich, for those very kind words. I am excited to share with you all this talk, which is different than anything I've given before, but I think it dovetails nicely between now being in my 7.5 year of faculty here, as well as leading the Women in Neurology group. Today's talk is going to be a little bit different, and the idea is to really help set the background and really ensure that us as a department are familiar with, we as a department are familiar with what the current state is and what the direction forward may look like. So for today's talk, I have no disclosures, but these are our learning objectives. Over the next 40 to 50 minutes, I'm hoping that you all will have a better understanding of the current state of the neurology workforce and why talking about this matters. Additionally, what I'm going to really spend some time on in the meat of my talk, absolutely, I'll spend some time on in the meat of my talk is going to be the current challenges. What are the challenges so that we know what the problems are that we can address, and then what the barriers are to promotion. And so none of that occurs without talking first about where we've been so that we can take a better look at where we're going. Let's see, all right. So this is Duke Medical School. I'm pretty sure these are the same 2 pictures. I found them in the Duke Medical Center archives, but if you look at the names, they're the same. Interestingly, the picture on the left had a little post-it next to it that said entering class. And then on the right, it said graduating class, but one was labeled 1930 and one was labeled 1932. So I'm not sure if I'm understanding medical education in the 1930s very well. But the picture is there to depict the story, right? And I think in this topic of the career of women in medicine, you can see the lone woman in the class of 1930, which I do think is quite impressive for 90 years ago. And you can imagine some of the barriers, the challenges that she may have faced in entering her career, in trying to establish herself as a physician, as a woman in medicine, as the lone person who may be forging her own path. At that time, this class probably reflected the community that we served, but you can tell that even in a community that may be made up of predominantly white folks, which may not be true in Durham back in 1930, there's still a lot to reflect upon the community, and there's a lot of improvement to be made upon this class back 90 years ago. So from there, I'll go to 2005. In 2005, Sandra Olson, who was the president of the AAN at the time and the only one in the history of the AAN in 2005, spoke at her presidential speech at the annual meeting to reflect upon her career as a woman in academic medicine, academic neurology. And she spoke at that time, which is where I've gotten this data from, that at that point, 10 deans of the 125 US medical schools were women, only 3 of whom were neurologists. And also in 2005, of the 120 departments of neurology that existed at the time, 6 were chaired by women. And as you can imagine, she spoke to how much work still needs to be done towards equity, towards recognizing women in the field for their contributions to academia, for their leadership skills, for their abilities, so that these numbers start to reflect more upon the community of neurologists that we are. And around the same time, AAMC's reports reflected the following. Of all the applicants to medical school, women represented 51% of them, and 50% of the first-year students were made up of women. Of all medical students in the US in 2003 and 2004, 48% were women. And at the time of graduation from medical school, 46% of medical school graduates were represented by women. 41% of all residents, postgraduates, were women, and 30% of all academic faculty were women. And on this slide itself, you can see where 20 years ago, we had this tremendous attrition of 20% of our workforce when it came to a pipeline to academic neurology. And around that time is where I feel like there were more publications, more active work being done to figure out why. And folks were being intentional about looking at where there was friction in the pipeline, where women chose to leave. And there were also a lot of assumptions made. Fast forward to my personal story. I interviewed here in November of 2012. And for that graduating class that I interviewed with, this was the graduating class. I loved my interview day. I think I found some incredible mentors or potential mentors on that interview day. Joel was one of the folks who interviewed me. And I think that lean towards mentorship by both the PD at the time, Dr. Sinha, and Dr. Morgan Lanner's interviews sold me on the program, but I was worried. I was worried, would I even be looked at if this is what their current graduating class looks like? Would I be considered? Was I what Duke wanted? This changed slowly with the class of 2014 having 1 woman, the class of 2015 having 2 women, all of whom I worked with. And then fast forward to my graduating class in 2017, we had 4 out of our 6 trainees were women. And I don't think there's a right answer here. I don't think that we need a class of all women or a class of not all men, but I do think we should have appropriate representation to who we're trying to train and really recognize people for not their gender, which I will fully, as an aside, just put on the disclaimer that it's a binary social construct, but for the purposes of science, sometimes the best we have for academic medicine. But I do think that it's important to recognize the skill set that we're trying to recruit for and really recruit the best, regardless of their backgrounds, but ensure that we're being intentional about how to do so. So this was the graduating class when I finished training. And just a year prior to that, we established the first Women in Neurology group. This came as a result of several conversations with the department of challenges faced by women in medicine. There's a story that I often share at the first Women in Neurology meeting of the year. You're all welcome to it, to hear about what catalyzed the creation of this. And with these 2 faculty members who created it, Dr. Wasim over at Duke Raleigh and myself have continued this since 2020. And the purpose it served was multifold. The first was to really provide a space where folks felt safe enough to share their experiences and challenges and learn from each other about how to continue along this path of being a career academic with the support that they need and continue to advocate for themselves. And what I really benefited from as a trainee in 2016 to 2018 was just being the fly on the wall. Truly, I don't think I contributed a whole lot to those meetings, but I loved to hear from Dr. Swisher or Dr. Massey, from our speakers who would come in and talk to us about how to be a self-advocate and how to find allies. Why did that matter? Well, taking that experience and taking some of my own experiences, having experienced bias as a trainee, this was all at the culmination of the Me Too movement. That's the editorial comment you see on the top left. You're not supposed to be able to read it. But it led me to, as a trainee, reflect upon some of the mentorship, the guidance, the learning that I had done, even passively at these meetings, and why it mattered. And it was at this moment in 2018 for this department that I really started putting a keen eye towards the data. And that's what we're here to discuss today. Not my experience, but really what academic neurology as a woman may be like, has been like, could be like. And so back in 2018, there was this first paper that I cited in that editorial I published, which was that at entry-level ranks at most academic institutions, this was based on claims data, so it's not always the cleanest, the male to female ratio was higher than that among current residents, suggesting that there was already an attrition occurring. We saw that in the AAMC data, but this is in 2018. So this persisted, this difference between more men than women in academia persisted with advancing rank, although that gap did narrow. And in the same paper, after adjustment for a year since medical school graduation, men were twice as likely to be full professors in neurology as women, and men had a higher number of publications. I'm going to throw a couple more facts at you, and we'll talk a little bit about what do we do about this. There was another paper that came out around the same time, around 2016 to 2018. This man named Anupam Jena, who's out of the Mass Gen, published a lot on gender disparities in academic medicine. And so this paper too was from CMS data, I think it's called Center Care, where all academic faculties were looked at en masse, and after adjustment for things like experience, age, academic rank, productivity, including NIH grants and authorship, clinical trial participation, and Medicare reimbursement data, which is really the primary place that this data came from. This article demonstrated in 2018 that female neurologists were paid approximately $30,000 less annually. And I'll take a pause here. Yesterday was Equal Pay Day. Does anyone know what that is? So, Equal Pay Day is, you do? Exactly. And so to catch up to a man working the same job, the idea is yesterday is how many extra days you need to do in the year in order to be paid the same amount as a woman. And it's, again, important to acknowledge that these discrepancies exist. Equal Pay Day comes from the data that on average, women in any field, in any career, make about 84 cents on the dollar to men. Here we are as physicians, as women who are making 85 cents on the dollar in 2018. And so that data stands. I think that discrepancy exists, and as recently as 6 years ago. So what are the challenges? What were the challenges, right? This is the historical part of today's talk. Well, historically, we've discussed microaggressions, whether that's looking over someone for a talk when they may be better suited for it, to pick the male sitting next to them. It's frank discrimination of, I'm not going to give you that time off to build your career or to start your family because I have a certain vision for what your academic career should look like. It's harassment from peers and staff. Again, frank discrimination of just feeling like you're in a antagonistic culture. And then the lack of career building opportunities. And I can say much more about that. But this, if you read the papers, and I'm happy to share those, a lot of the discussion has postulated, and there's some data behind it, that women are often given some of the tasks that are thought of as menial, as the housekeeping tasks of a department, the party planning tasks of a department, even in a career in academic medicine. And often that may take away from their ability to spend time publishing, spend time writing. And that challenge is twofold. One is having the ability to say yes or no, and the other is being offered those roles that may not be directly impacting a person's academic career. And so that lack of career building opportunity, the lack of sponsorship, the lack of role models, and that last piece, I think, is what historically can be the ball and chain that drags us back, which is that it's tough to know what your career may look like as an academic woman in neurology if you don't have a lot of role models to look to see what that may be like. So then, what's the current state? This is where I'll go into the current data, what we know now about what women in neurology are like. And in this next 15 to 20 minutes, I will share with you data that's specific to Duke, not yet published, but based on survey results and some looks more nationally. The first look here is AAMC data yet again. I think the AAMC does a great job of characterizing, quantifying US medical schools and what entry, matriculation looks like. And it was in 2003 that 50% of all entering classes, the US medical schools, were comprised of women. And you can see that since 2003, that has fluctuated between less than or more than 50%, but around that point was where that inflection point occurred. This matters. We'll talk about why. I've shared with you the graduating classes in the last 10 years. This is the current composite. And again, I shared with you my own intrinsic concerns about ranking Duke when I was interviewing here. And I think that is reflected here to say we want to be able to show folks that we will see them for where they are and provide them a training experience that's world-class, regardless of what their backgrounds are, whether or not they're a man. And so we look at our faculty positions now. In 2021, again, AAMC data, about 43% of faculty positions in all of medicine, this is not specific to neurology, were held by women. And in 2023 at Duke, and this is for a women in medicine and women in neurology collaboration we did in September, that's where the data is from. At that point, 39% of our faculty were comprised of women, which is getting right to that national average. As an aside, back in 2018, when I wrote my paper and looked at our data, that number was about 27%. I don't know off the top of my head. I can look. Yeah, I think it's a little bit higher. It is. So that leads us to what are our current challenges? Why are we not bridging those gaps? Why don't we have that 50% or greater representation of women in medicine that are going to medical school represented in academia? And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are intrinsic, and I will always see folks for their own vision of what is success in their life. But when it comes to the pipeline of academic neurology, some of the challenges I'll highlight in the next few slides are the availability of mentorship or sponsorship, academic promotions, the process and demystifying it, and then parental leave and lactation policies, which I'll touch briefly on. If you take nothing away from my talk today, I'd love for you all to know the difference between a coach, a mentor, and a sponsor. And this too is completely relevant to any career you're in, not just in medicine. I heard the quote once that a coach is someone who talks to you, a mentor is someone who talks with you, and a sponsor is someone who talks about you. And that stuck with me, where the coach is someone who you work with to help build your own sense of self. And it's someone that you involve or engage for yourself. Whereas a mentor is someone you speak with as far as what should I be doing? And they say, oh, you should sign up for this, this, and this because this has been helpful in my career. Or be sure you take that clinical trial because that's going to be helping you with the academic process. And it's a really impactful trial. That's the difference between those two things, which are people speaking with or at you, and a sponsor is that a sponsor talks about you. They say, you know what, I nominated you for this position. I think you'd be great for it. Or I would really like for you to take that talk, and I've already made the conversation happen. So as long as you say yes, they'll be happy to have you. The guideline committees, the committees for consensus curricula that I've been nominated to by by faculty members who are here, the request to speak, the invitations to speak, that sponsorship is not just, hey, you should do this, but here is the avenue to do this. And that, I think, has gone a long way just as a personal reflection of allowing me to continue to advance academically, which is to feel seen for what I can bring to the table and to be given the opportunity to do so. Questions about those two things? Okay. So then back to our data for the department. This is 2023, again, data from last September. Big thanks to Pam Neville for helping me with this. This is our faculty ratio right now. That's 38.54%. I rounded it up to 39% that are comprised of women for our department faculty. And what I think is helpful, let me move this, is the trend to see over time. I shared with you the 2018 data, which was 26.9% of our faculty. And you can see that when it comes to the representation of women in our department, we've gone up steadily, maybe some bumps along the way. But to go from 32% of our faculty in 2019 to 39% of our faculty in 2023 reflects some of the intentional measures that have been taken to ensure that we are reflecting the best pool and not being biased towards a certain vision of what that may look like. This too is from our department data, also from last September. And I'll walk you through the numbers here. The top half are all of our female faculty members, and the bottom half are our male faculty members in orange. And the striking thing here is that even at the entry-level faculty positions, that's clinical associate or assistant professor, or in the male counterparts, that's the consulting associates, clinical associates, and assistant professor, there is immediately a discrepancy, where in those entry-level, 70% of our faculty, 59 plus 10.81, are comprised in those junior faculty positions, whereas that's about 58, 60%, we'll say, in men. Now, that may be because of a representation of our recent pushes to advance women into those junior faculty positions where they may not have been offered those opportunities below. But what I also thought was striking is, as expected, you look at the advanced tracks or more advanced positions in faculty, the professor or tenured professorships, there's a decrease in the total number of faculty members. But even then, at the professor level, 13.5% of our women faculty are at that tenured professor level, where 17.5% are at men. And again, that may reflect some of the generational changes, some of the differences that we've had in recruitment and engagement and retention over time. But I do think that that gives us some discrete data points to work towards, allowing it to work towards balancing things out. So we're going to go away from Duke data for a moment. This was some interesting data that came out of Zach London's group at University of Michigan, where Doximity, US News World Report, was looked at to identify top programs. And then the group that put this together in 2020, looked at all of the faculty rosters and then put together a data sheet of their contributions to academia, whether they had clinical trials ongoing, what their publication records were. And so of the 1,712 academic neurologists, only about 30.8% at that time, 2019 or so, were women. That's pretty in keeping with what our numbers were as a department as well. Of the 29 institutions evaluated, though, 28 of them had less than a 50-50 gender ratio reflected in its faculty. And that percentage of female faculty for the 29 top institutions in neurology, there's some bias there too, ranged from 18% to 42.9%, which is looking really good relative to those AAMC numbers in 2021 we saw. So I think there's still ample room for improvement here when it comes to that reflection of our workforce and being able to promote the right pipeline. This is a paper, some of you may have seen it, was circulated heavily last summer, which was really to cement that data that I showed from the AAMC in 2003, 2004, which is that there is significant workforce attrition amongst male and female physicians working in US academic hospitals. Here, in their table 1, you can see that significant p-value in men versus women when it came to what the numbers were of people who left academia. And In all physicians, in women physicians, this was about 90,000 physicians, again, claims data that they were using, 38% of women left academia, where that number was about 32% in men. And what was interesting in this paper was that at every epoch that they defined, this was not based on rank, this was again claims data, and so we just sort of hit what academic physicians were hitting Medicare claims. You can see that at every level, there was a significant difference in attrition, minus the women who'd been in their careers for over 30 years, with, again, a significant difference. They specifically looked at surgical specialties and whether there's a difference there of who stays. And you can see here that the numbers, again, of the 89,000 women, only 13% of women stayed in academia for over 30 years. And so those discrepancies have been looked at in a couple different ways. And what we chose to do in 2019 was to administer a cross-sectional study to get a sense of people on the ground. This is called the Women in Neurology Collaborative Survey, or WINCS, and this cross-sectional study administered a standardized survey to all neurology faculty across 19 academic neurology centers in the US. The initial idea for this was put together by a steering committee of the AAN, which was led by Sneha Mantri. And she let me know about this project coming on and tapped me on the shoulder to say, would this be something you'd be willing to administer to our faculty? And so I came on as a site PI for this multi-center survey that was rolled out in 2019 to 2020. And based on our recruitment, how well our survey results were going, we sort of included further sites just based on word of mouth. And this is what the sites look like. So you can see there's decent representation of academic medical centers throughout the East Coast, even into the Midwest. There's this paucity of data from the West until you get to California. And unfortunately, that's fairly typical of a lot of our national data for survey-based results from academic faculty. The other thing to know here is that our site response rate, which I'll go into here shortly, was about 27 faculty members in 2019, which was about 35% of our faculty at that time. That's pretty good for a survey. And most successful surveys, even those that have been published in big journals like JAMA, have had results of 15 to 20%. And so I was impressed that our survey got that kind of investment from our faculty. And this was sent out to not just women faculty, this was sent out to all faculty to get a better understanding of our perceptions. So I'll start with some of the earlier questions we asked in the survey, and I'll go through the Duke results in the next few minutes. The first thing we asked our survey participants was, do you feel that there is a gender diversity in leadership? And for the few slides, you'll see this spread that's sort of a Likert spread on the bottom that goes from very strongly disagree on the left to very strongly agree on the right. And there's always an NA and don't know, and we'll watch out for that. And you can see here the split was pretty down the middle. Some folks thought that perhaps there was some agreement on, yes, there is gender diversity in leadership, but it looks like there's still work to be done. So maybe it's slight rightward lean. When asked if there were programs that existed to enhance gender equity, again, I think the lean was much stronger this time towards the right, whereas our faculty felt that those programs did exist. But then the follow-up question was, are they helpful? And again, folks were all over the place on this. We weren't sure is the most common answer, don't know. And then sort of, again, the split between agree and disagree, I think that raises some questions too. So what are the current challenges? And based on this survey, I'll share with you all some of the results that are unique to our department, and then also share again some national data that really helps reflect what the challenges are that women in academic neurology come across. But I'll highlight again, the main ones are that availability of mentorship and sponsorship, what academic promotions look like and how to go through that process well, and then policies to help support folks for parental leave and lactation. And so in this survey, we again asked, do you feel that there's dedicated sponsorship? And I think that there's a lean towards disagreement here, although I wouldn't be able to hang my hat on it. And a lot of NAs and don't knows, but not a whole lot of agrees and strongly agrees. When asked if our faculty had received sponsorship with career advancement, again, the answers were all over the place, lots of don't know and NA. But things changed when we asked about mentorship. And when we said, did you receive dedicated career mentorship? There was this strong agree and very strongly agree, with a couple folks feeling that they disagreed. But again, the lean was stronger towards the positive side. And whether that mentorship allowed for career advancement, again, we were sort of split. This feels like a very normal distribution, with a little bit of don't know, but folks feeling very strongly when they did receive it that they had benefited from career advancement as a result of this. And so I'll step away from the Duke data for a moment, because you can see we're sort of all over the place. And I'll take a look at the AAN data, which has been sort of this publicly available data that folks have been publishing on really in the last 3 to 5 years. And so this paper I'll start with looked at gender representation amongst authors of practice guidelines that were developed, endorsed, or affirmed by the AAN. And what they reported was that of 68 clinical practice guidelines published during the time period of 2015 to 2020, 31% of the physician authors were women. Starting to see that 30% number come up more and more. That led to 68.3% of the genders based on this just observational study as the other split. And what I thought was interesting is less than a fifth of the authors were women as first authors. And so this raised a lot of questions about what are the processes to reflect the current AAN membership and to reflect the current state of the academic workforce, especially as they looked as recently as 2020, where those numbers you would imagine would start to equalize a little bit more. Similarly, someone else published, this was back in 2020 as well, the representation of women plenary speakers at the AAN. And here I'll give the AAN a big kudos, because you can see that in the last 2 decades, there's sort of been this waxing and waning of how many plenary speakers are comprised of women. But the gray bar and the light gray bar, I guess the 2 dark bars, are not only just all AAN members and what their percentages of all membership, which is around 30 to 40%, but what percentage of US medical school faculty of neurology faculty are made up of women. And you can see that over time, as that data becomes more available, those lines are quite convergent. And the plenary speaker percentage really seems to line up with that. And so really since 2017 on, at least according to this 2020 publication, it seems that there has been more of an effort to invest into plenary speakers that reflect the current state of academic neurologists. And again, as you can see, it's been sort of all over the place before then. And then the last piece of AAN data I'll share is that the awards at the AAN. This study came out in 2018, a little bit earlier than the other 2. And it looked at the total AAN annual meeting awards, physician recognition awards. And I'll just start by saying since 1998, there's quite a lot more awards given out. And so you can see this trend by the AAN. But the blue line are the men and the red line is the women. And from its inception of awards for the AAN, even up until 1997, where exactly 0 women received any awards at all, there has been this divergence in the graph and the curves. And so that discrepancy was looked at hard to say, why is this happening? And we'll talk about that in a moment. Finally, just one last word on parental leave. This is unpublished data from the WINC survey from all 19 centers that is currently under review. But I wanted to share this table with you because I think it's important. Of all the faculty members that we interviewed for that WINC survey of all of our 19 sites, which is about 500 respondents total, we looked at folks who identified themselves as having taken parental leave and those who hadn't. And there really wasn't any difference in their academic productivity, save the total numbers of awards received. And I think that's important to say out loud because there has been this predisposition to believe that if there's time taken out, there'll be a slowdown or a lack of in someone's academic productivity. And again, speaking from experience, I don't think that's been the case, but you have to have the right culture and structure to support someone to be able to take their leave, whether they're men or women, and still ensure that their academic careers are moving forward all the while. And so this, I thought, was fairly powerful data to say that whether or not you take leave doesn't matter, you do what's right for you. And that is fairly impactful as we think about building those cultures and building those structures for support. So I'll leave with this last Duke data from the WINC survey. Again, sort of all over the place, sort of a normative distribution. But the question was, there are things that I want to do at work that don't get done because of the demands of my family or my spouse and partner. And one of the last pieces of this survey was looking at caregiver burdens shared by women. There's tons of data in the general medical field about how women share a lot of, or take on a lot more burdens of caregiving, whether it's children, aging parents, house needs, and what does that look like and how does that affect their academic functioning? And so even at Duke, if you take a look at it, there's few folks that feel that, yes, that is the case. I'm not able to do what I want to get done because of the demands that I have elsewhere. There's a few that very strongly disagree. And then we're sort of split all between. And I think it's important when we get data like that to think about what can we do about it. So that's what we'll talk about in the last few minutes here today, which is what are our future directions? Well, that survey, we have currently three we have three manuscripts and two abstracts that we're presenting at AAN that look at gender and racial inequities in academic neurology, that really reflect upon the lactation and parental leave experience of all faculty in neurology, and try to give discrete examples of how we try to address some of those inequities. The AAN has come forward with this Women in Academic Neurology toolkit, and I screenshotted this primarily for the list of words that you see on the left there. There's so many ways that it can be challenging to be a woman in academic neurology. Honestly, I don't think this is unique to women. Things like imposter syndrome, things like leadership training, things like how to go about having a successful mentorship relationship, how to negotiate for salaries, how to be a physician parent and live your life and run your career and still be there for folks at home, what those disparities are and what the current state is. And there's a lot of information on this page that links out to other pages that has structure or support or resources in reading more, learning more, and tools to help you navigate some of those challenges, which I think is commendable. And then on the ground here at Duke, what can we do to foster equity? Well, I think now that we know the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, allowing for forums to grow, to take on our junior faculty under our wings and say, these are the things that have worked for me, and these are the things you should get involved in, and hey, I signed you up for this. But sponsorship has to be intentional. It shouldn't be, I told you, or you've been voluntold to do something, but something that someone sees you for and says, this is in line with your goals, objectives, hopes, dreams as an academician. Networking is important. And as someone who has stayed here since 2013, it's something I'm acutely aware of how helpful it's been as I've grown my career, of meeting other folks who do similar things at other institutions and how they navigated challenges of their own. And that network really helps you have the ability to call up a colleague and say, hey, I'm running into this. How do I solve this problem? What have you done in the past? Transparency is something that I'll again commend our department for doing very well in the last few years, particularly with Dr. Spector leading the DE&I group, which is to provide transparency in departmental operation and promotion criteria, certainly at the faculty level now that we've gone through this, not really gone through, but we're part of this giant switch to being employed under DHIP. There's a lot more scrutiny of how folks are being promoted, how they're being recruited, what the compensation looks like, and kind of leveling out that playing field of what the expectations are for folks in different places. And if they're different, really asking why. And then finally, as far as what we can do now as a group here getting together, be intentional about inclusion, not just calling on someone because you have their phone number on speed dial or you got drinks with them last Wednesday, but rather they seem to be the best fit for the role. Implicit bias training is something that we have embarked upon for the past 6 to 8 years with Dr. Spector leading the way for our recruitment, with residency recruitment, to ensure that we are all aware of where we may be looking for certain words that are biased as we read those letters of recommendation, or where the interactions that may impact what we think of someone but doesn't really reflect their skill set. Check in, and I've kept that vague on purpose. Check in with your mentors or your mentees to say, are you where you want to be? Is this the right place for you? And what are the things that you feel like are missing? And if they don't know the answer to that, which is very common in junior faculty and academic neurology, giving folks a sense of what that looks like. And the best way I've seen that done is seeing it done, having the role models, having people paint the picture, having folks set up mentors for me that I can call and say, well, what was your story? How did you do this so well? Because I look up to you and I'd like to do something like that one day. And then finally, one of the things that I think is unique to Duke, just based on our data from the Women in Neurology Collaborative Survey, is to define what successful programs to enhance gender equity look like. What does it mean to have a program? How do we say if it did its job? Yes, we have Women in Neurology, and yes, we have the great DE&I committee, but why is that good? And to be able to answer that question with certainty will help us all feel like we're moving in the right direction. With that, awesome. Thanks.
Great.
Of course, thank you.
Questions from the internet or from the room?
I see Dr. Rozier asked a question. I'll read it out loud, Marvin, which is, in counting gender of physicians, how do you count trans persons? And this is a really important point you bring up, Marvin, which is that we've forced this binary recognition of women versus men. And the truth is, there are transgender physicians. In fact, I've learned from many of them in the neurology space, and they've actually had some really insightful things to share with me when it comes to being a male to female transgender neurologist practicing in academia today, and now being thrust upon the challenges of being a woman in medicine, which is something they hadn't previously experienced. But the quick answer to your question, Marvin, is we haven't done that well. This is truly forced binary, only for the sake of being able to count things. And as you heard from some of these studies, many of them are observational, based on folks just going through a website for an academic department and counting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Questions in the room? All right, Suma, I've got a question.
Let's
So
hear
I remember when you were young, and this is a common issue of whether, as opportunities pop up, as they do, and people say, you know, why don't you work with me on this? You want to write a paper on neuro-ophthalmology or something? How do you know when you should say yes and when you should say no?
I may not have the right answer here, but I don't think you know how to say no until you've said yes to a few things. And I think for me, I started by saying yes to many things. And even today, in this day, there is a constant reevaluation of, am I doing all the right things that are important to me? Or am I doing things that are important to my career? Do they coincide? And is there something that could be jettisoned because it's really not meaningful to me or my career? And over time, I've picked up a lot of those roles. So again, I don't think I have the right answer because I don't think I've done it perfectly. But in saying yes, I've learned what are the things that are valued to me? What are the things I'm excited to show up for? And what are the things I feel like I'm dragging my feet because my heart's not in it? And that's been a fairly decent compass over the years.
Yeah, and what they say, like, if you're not sure what you want to do, you should say yes to a lot of things, and because it's an exploration mode. But as soon as you figure out what you want to do, and this was Suma's course, then you start saying no to the things that are kind of extraneous. Yep. But to get to that point, you've got to go through the point of saying yes, so you can kind of figure out what is the thing that you're really going to focus on. And I think that's important. Right? Are we right?
I agree. See another chat, I'll check that. Yeah, so Katie Moore said, I love Zach London's approach to this question. That is, everything you say yes to should answer yes to 2 of the 3 following questions. 1, is it easy? 2, does it advance my career? And 3, do I find joy in it?
You don't know if you do till it's over.
Amy, you did. This is Janice Massey. I have a comment to make, and so does my grandson. Yes. Yes, I love your shoes. Yes.
I look at my socks.
And your socks. Yes.
No, these are mama's socks.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'll talk to you in a minute. I think one thing, Suma, that I would add that you may not be aware of, but in the early years here at Duke for neurology, we were a division of internal medicine. And as such, there were only a few women, if you included everyone in all of the divisions of internal medicine, including neurology. And I was the only neurology, and we had others who were the only rheumatologist or endocrinologist or whatever. But there were about 8 to 10 of us, and we met as a committee for women. And through that committee, we were able to appeal to the then department chair, who was Department of Medicine chair, Joe Greenfield, who gave us blessings to proceed and not treat us as, kind of a back rooms kind of hiding out group. So we got great support from him, and through that, we're able then to have some commonality with one another. It was a lonely place to be a woman in those days, in that there were so few throughout the institution. So from that came a lot of change in the recognition of maternity leave, for example, that had not been really a part of our contract. And so there were a number of sort of nuts and bolts types of issues that were quite big that now are just sort of taken for granted, not for granted, but not even thought about. But I think it's important to recognize that nuclear group that began all those years ago, and the importance it was, at least to us, to have, a friendly face in the hallway kind of thing. And I just wanted to give some recognition to that group. All of those women have succeeded in their areas of specialty and contributed greatly to the field of medicine in general. Thank you for letting me say that.
Of course, thank you, Janice. I think it's important to recognize how we get to where we are, which is very much part of that history.
Yes.
Here we go.
So, questions before I dominate things. Come on, no questions, sorry. Where do you stand on Lean In, the book?
I don't think I have a stance on it. There are. I read it, and it was one of the first. We set up Women in Neurology when it first started in 2016 as almost a journal club.
Sandberg was the number 2 person at Facebook.
Right? Yeah. And so I think there's some good pearls from there on how to be a self-advocate. But I think you have to apply some of the pearls that have worked for others to your own situation. And so there's
the fact that she was operating in a mendacious, horrible organization kind of dampens the message a bit.
Exactly. So I think there's tools there, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's the right answer. In fact, I don't believe there is one right answer. But part of that is knowing what you want and what feels right to you. And if you don't know that at the end of training, that's what your careers are, is to help kind of figure it out and talk to the folks who've done it different ways to see what's right.
There was one chapter in the book that I particularly liked. It's called "Will You Be My Mentor?" The thing after the little ducklings, are you my mother?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And she just talked about the zillions of times younger women would come to her and say, "Would you be my mentor?" And she'd say, "Well, what am I getting out of this?" And I think that's a really important point when you're getting mentors and advisors. And what they can get out of it is just your enthusiasm. Like old folks are kind of burned out, and having an enthusiastic young person around can be really energizing, or your own hard work, or it doesn't have to be you're some superstar content expert. You can bring lots of things to the relationship, but you do have to bring something. Otherwise, why would someone engage in such?
I think yep.
So do you want to announce your event Friday?
Oh, yes. Where it is match week after all, and also Women's History Month, so it's an extra honor to be here. But we are having a match day kind of reveal. Of course, I'll send out the usual email at 1 o'clock or so. But for those of you all who are in the residency program, associated with the residency program, feel free to step in to the 9th floor DCT room. We're going to be doing a short reveal around 12:30 or so to welcome our new residents.
Do you already know?
I do not already know.
Oh, you really?
It's going to be a surprise for everyone. Yes.